positive. And I say positive because we are sick of the negative and simplistic portrayal of Europe, particularly in the UK. We are enthusiastic supporters of Europe's freedoms, and we're not embarrassed by them. We cherish and unashamedly advocate for the benefits of freedom of movement. EU citizens are valued members of our communities should have the right to fully participate in civic life, to stand for office, to vote in UK referendums and general elections, and we would encourage other EU member states to extend those rights in a similar fashion. And we will be fighting for UK citizens abroad to have that say in the confirmatory referendum we are demanding on Brexit. But we're also focused about action in the EU and the future. The Lib Dems have a manifesto that puts the UK at the heart of the EU, driving the big issues facing Europe today. I'll just name a few. Addressing the climate and biodiversity emergency. We've got ambitious zero carbon targets for the EU by 2050 and 2045 for the UK. We want a Paris-style agreement on biodiversity and an EU action plan on deforestation, and we're campaigning to ban fracking across the EU. But we also want to look at the future and be able to seize the new economy that's emerging through the digital revolution that we're seeing. We want a digital single market with no virtual borders. We want to use European funds to address the huge skill shift that's inevitably going to come from this new technology like AI and automation, and make sure our European workforce is equipped to actually seize that opportunity. But we also recognise that there are threats there too. We need to protect individuals' privacies and rights through a legal framework to address those kinds of technologies like technology players across Europe don't become anti-competitive. We also want to make Europe fairer and safer. Corporate tax evasion across Europe, so setting up a £7.5 billion fund to help those that have already been damaged by Brexit. The Liberal Democrats in these European elections, you have a chance to say, is enough, stop Brexit. Let's lead in Europe and start focusing on the real issues we all face.
Thank you very much, Helen, for that rousing. Always good to see a rousing support for the European Union. Our next speaker is Alyn Smith, a long-standing SNP MSP. Delight to have you here, Alyn. Oops. Oh, sorry, Alyn. You need to unmute yourself.
That looks better.
Okay.
Can you hear me there?
Yep.
Excellent. I was wondering how many glitches I'd have for tonight, but only one. That's not too bad. Well, firstly, thanks for setting up a new venture. And I do a lot of remote working, obviously covering the whole of Scotland, as does all other Scots MEPs with meetings to the islands and the highlands and that sort of thing. But I've never done an online hustings before, not least across the whole of the European continent. So congratulations for that, and credit to you for putting it together. Very proud to be standing in this election. I was first elected in 2004 to represent the whole of Scotland within the European Parliament, and it's been a roller coaster, and in the last couple of years particularly it's been a roller coaster because Scotland voted to remain within the European family of nations. Northern Ireland also voted to remain within the European family of nations, and where we saw the narrow referendum victory for leave across the whole of the UK, we did not see a plan for what was to come next, not least amongst the people who were most proposing to leave. Now, I think it's perfectly legitimate to propose to leave the European Union. We had in our independence referendum in Scotland a lively discussion about other ways of interacting with the EU, the benefits of EU membership. We've got Norway just over there, we've got Iceland just over there. We know there's other ways of doing this. But if you're going to be proposing change, you need to propose what that change is going to be. And that was where the problems started that we've been dealing with over the last 3 years. And I am very proudly Scottish, and I'm very proudly pro-European. I believe Scotland's best future lies within the European Union, our family of nations. And I believe that for the UK as well. I don't think there's a good Brexit for anybody except for spivs and chancers and speculators in the currency markets. and disaster capitalists and the people who have been funding the Leave campaign. So we've got a challenge. And I think this European election, and remember this was the European election that the Conservatives didn't want us to have, still don't want us to have. Mrs May said quite clearly that we were going to be out on the 29th of March. We weren't. We were going to be out on the 12th of April. We weren't. And now we're going to be out on Halloween. Let's see what happens. I think what happens in this European election is going to be of crucial relevance to what happens next on Brexit. I don't think Mrs May is in charge of anything. She doesn't seem to be even in charge of her own resignation, never mind anything else about what's happening to Brexit. And this is too important. There are millions of people, I know this from my mailbag and my email inbox, every day feeling anxiety about the rights that they have taken as EU citizens, on which they've decided to make life choices, where people live, where people work, even indeed who their families are and where they stay. And the fact that people are feeling anxious about this has to stop. Too many people are feeling hostage from this. So the SNP, we are proudly pro-European party. We're launching our manifesto tomorrow. It's a very straightforward message that Scotland's for Europe. And we'll be putting out policies which are about the wider stuff as well as Brexit. We need to stop Brexit. Now, I see David Martin's involved in this as well. I was one of the litigants that took the UK government to the European Court of Justice to get a black and white ruling from the ultimate court in this matter that Article 50 can be revoked. That's the legally cleanest way to do this. Mrs May triggered Article 50 by writing a letter. It can be revoked by writing another letter if there's a will in the House of Commons to do it. The trouble, of course, being that we see chaos within the Westminster parties, and they agree on lots of things that they don't agree on, but they can't actually find anything positive on which they do. So we can't revoke Article 50, then we're in favour of a confirmatory vote now that we see Mrs May's deal and we see what Brexit actually is, shorn of the empty words and the false promises. And we believe that the answer to a failure of democracy is more democracy. Put it back to the people as a confirmatory vote, set against Remain and the status quo. We believe that is in the UK's best interests. We certainly believe it's in Scotland's best interests. And our policies that we'll be putting forward tomorrow in Glasgow will be there for everyone to read. And we believe that Scotland's best future is as an independent family, a member of the European family, but pending that, we want to turn around Brexit for the whole of the UK. So look forward to your questions and comments. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Alan. Our next speaker is another Scottish MEP, David Martin of the Labour Party, who's another long-serving MEP. I'm delighted to have you here, David.
Thank you very much. Apologies, I'm out on the road, so I haven't got you can't see me, but I'm on my mobile. But it's a pleasure to be able to join you. The Labour Party is fighting these elections with an aim to remain inside the European Union, and we're fighting this election on a common manifesto with political parties across all 28 member states. And we have a very clear agenda for reforming Europe. We think part of the reason we got a negative vote in the referendum is the fact that Europe is still not seen as relevant enough to enough people. So, for example, in this election, we want to fight in work poverty by ending zero-hour contracts, by ending the status of essentially false self-employment, and ensuring a minimum wage across the whole of the European Union. We also have an ambitious agenda on climate change, and we particularly want to see the European Union budget reorientated towards tackling climate change. We've been advocating 25% of the budget should go towards climate change policy, and we would like zero tolerance for any new policies that in any way could be deemed as enhancing carbon emissions. So, for example, we'd agree with what the Liberal colleague said. We should end fracking. We should have a European ban on fracking, and we think Europe should use its global clout to try and get the ban on plastic containers across the globe. We're also campaigning to ensure that the workers' rights and environmental rights that we've managed to entrench in the treaties remain and are not in any way watered down over the next 5 years, in fact, ideally enhanced. And just on the issue of free movement, I frankly can't resist pointing out that I was the European Parliament's rapporteur nearly 30 years ago, 20-something years ago, on the Maastricht Treaty. And it was the European Parliament who pushed very hard in the run-up to Maastricht through the 4 reports that I did for the Parliament for citizens' rights to be included in that treaty, and the voting rights we now have, the citizens' rights we now have, thanks to the Maastricht Treaty, I am very keen that we preserve and again, where possible, enhance. In terms of Brexit, frankly, I think British politics is in a state where no matter what the outcome of the European elections are, it will have no impact on the Brexit process. Unfortunately, that's been driven by Westminster, and Westminster will decide. The one impact it could have, if there's a massive vote for the Brexit Party, the Tories, if they can be any more panicked and any more in chaos, the Tories might just go for a no-deal Brexit, which would be an utter disaster for the United Kingdom. But to conclude, personally, I don't think we're leaving the 31st of October. I don't think there's an agreement in sight. I think despite what I've just said, no-deal Brexit is still unlikely. So we're unlikely to be in the European Union way beyond 31st of October, still arguing, as Alyn rightly points out, how we agree the principle for leaving, but not the mechanism. And the old cliche that there's 50 ways to leave your mother and probably 200 ways to leave the European Union.
Thank you, David. Our next speaker is Carmen Smith, who's standing for Plaid Cymru down in Wales. Delighted to have you here. It's a shame we have 3 of the 4 nations represented. I did try and get all 4, but it didn't work out. So over to you, Carmen.
Yeah, thank you so much first for the invitation and taking a firm interest in this very exciting election. So every one of us who wants to retain European citizenship, who wants to keep us at the heart of Europe, and who wants to turn the tide of Brexit, we're all on the same side. I'm Carmen Smith. I'm Wales's youngest candidate in this election and one of the youngest candidates across Europe. And I refuse to stand idly by while my generation witnesses our opportunities lost, our freedoms restricted, and our identities taken away. And I chose to stand for Plaid Cymru, the Party of Wales. We are the only party that can make Wales matter in this election. We're the only party of Remain that can win a seat in Wales. And we're the only party of Remain that has ever won a seat in Wales. And we launched our manifesto just recently, and so from the environment to opportunities for young people, and from local economies to migration, our manifesto sets out a clear ambition on our ambition to make Wales matter across Europe. Friends of mine over the last few weeks from the Labour Party, from the Liberal Democrats and the Greens have told me that they this time will be voting for Plaid Cymru to send a clear message to Westminster to demand a final say referendum. And I'm so grateful to all of those different people for choosing Plaid Cymru this time. It's quite exciting. If you have been affected by the rightward shift of the Tories or and the re-emergence of Farage, Plaid Cymru has always stood by the side of people against that far right mission. And if you refuse to stand aside, like me, and if you demand a final say, and if you want to make Wales matter, that we'd love your support, and to demand a final say, vote for the only Remain party in Wales. But very, very much looking forward to your questions and comments, and just thank you for having me this evening.
Thank you very much, Carmen. And last but not least, all the way from Cornwall, in fact, probably one of the oldest nations in Europe, representing the Green Party, we have Tom Scott. You'll need to unmute yourself, Tom. Tom, you'll need to unmute yourself. You'll need to click on the screen.
Can you hear me now?
We can now, that's great.
Yeah, I'm Tom Scott. I'm one of the Green Party's Euro election candidates for the South West and Gibraltar, a huge region. And as Gordon said, I'm lucky enough to be speaking to you from Cornwall, which is looking particularly beautiful today. That's where I live, and I work as a university lecturer and a writer and editor. And over the past couple of years, I've been working very closely with Molly Scott-Cato MEP, who's been the Green MEP for our region for the last 5 years. And I've seen firsthand what a huge difference just one Green MEP can make. Working with the Green Group in the European Parliament, Molly's done fantastic work on obviously things like environmental protections, on climate change, the kind of things that people rightly expect Green MEPs to be doing, but also on things like tax justice, stopping massive tax avoidance by corporations and the ultra-wealthy, on transparency, protecting whistleblowers, controlling corporate lobbying in Brussels and Strasbourg, sustainable finance, and a whole range of other issues. But the work I've done for Molly has focused particularly on the criminality that tainted the Brexit referendum campaign in 2016, and on the real motives of the people who promoted Brexit, on the illegal funding, the massive abuses of personal data, the personal profits made from the referendum by close associates of some of the leading Brexiters. And some of this work that we've done together, I think, has helped to reopen police investigations, ongoing investigations into a number of these people, and I very much hope that some of them will soon be facing prosecution on serious criminal charges. Brexit is basically a crime scene, and it's incredible that we are going ahead with something that's so damaging to our national interest on the basis of a result that was achieved by what were by now plainly criminal means. I'm a passionate believer in the power of the EU to do good. And here in Cornwall, I've seen how our local community here has benefited massively from the UK's membership of the EU, not least in the form of a university, which is where I work, by the way. That was built, a whole new campus with about £100 million of EU investment about 15 years ago. And I've seen the massive difference that this has made in terms of educational opportunities for young people in Cornwall. Opportunities that simply weren't there before. It's also given a huge boost to our local economy. It's created hundreds of new jobs, many of them in the high-tech and knowledge sectors, which are so important to the future of Cornwall and other regions of Europe. But for me, these elections are really most of all about what kind of future there is for young people, not just in Cornwall, but in the Southwest and the UK and the whole of Europe, in fact. We know that the big majority of young people here voted against Brexit if they were able to vote at all. And for them, that includes my own daughters, it's simply incomprehensible that we would choose to close off their freedom to live, to study, to work in Europe. They see our country becoming a closed-minded, insular little Britain, and they are deeply and rightly angry about that. They're angry too about our failure to seriously address the climate emergency, which is hanging so heavily over their future, and the future of the whole world. And of course, many of the leading promoters of Brexit are also climate change deniers. Farage, Johnson, Nigel Lawson, just about every candidate on the Brexit Party's list. And the same dark money that flowed into the Brexit campaign has also been funding efforts to muddy the waters of climate science and to delay action to tackle the climate emergency. So I'm proud to be standing for a party that addresses both of these crises, the Brexit crisis and the even bigger climate crisis, head on. A party that stood up to the lies and the criminality of the far right, and that has led the campaign for a people's vote, particularly Caroline Lucas, I'm thinking of there, and that has such an excellent record of fighting for a better future for the young people of Europe. Thank you, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Tom. I'll now open up to questions from the floor. What I'll do is, if you shout out your question, I'll repeat it close to the microphone to make sure that the candidates can hear. Agnes. Oh, sorry, Heather.
So I kind of feel like Brexit has highlighted all the fault lines of problems in British politics. For example, Scotland and Northern Ireland both remain, but people are being forced out, the weakness of their public place, etc., etc., etc. What can we do going forward to ensure that our democracy is fit for purpose?
Okay, I'll just repeat that. So, the question is, Brexit seems to have exposed all the fault lines of British politics, from first past the vote, from different nations voting different ways with no sensible way of dealing with that referendum, and what steps can we take to address the issues that the whole Brexit process has brought up. I think the first question, we'll just go around the panel in the same order that we took the questions. So we'll start with Helen.
Yeah, I mean, as you will know, the Liberal Democrats have obviously been a very strong force in constitutional reform, and we are strong advocates of proportional representation, which is obviously where you would start with a lot of the issues in terms of where we've managed to get to. I think a lot of the issues we've had is the fact that the first past the post system has gradually just created this inertia within the political system, whereby actually starting with the expenses scandal onwards, you actually end up having a political class who are essentially more interested in sorting out the issues amongst their own parties than actually being really accountable to the electorate. I mean, I think in terms of more broadly, in terms of what I think it would be entirely fair to say that people in Scotland and people in Northern Ireland who voted Remain, and particularly Scotland voted very heavily Remain, will feel very disenfranchised by the process, which frankly has been run by, particularly by Theresa May, as very England-centric, and almost, I think there's a level of arrogance there. And I think it has exposed an issue, particularly there around justice. I mean, we are a party that believes that nationalism isn't an answer. We are certainly advocating going forward, which I think would start addressing and allowing us to, as the UK, start putting some of that sort of tension to bed and recognising the diversity. I'm from the northeast of England, and we're often overlooked as well. So I think there is definitely a need to recognise that with significant constitutional change.
Thank you. Alyn? You need. Oh God! You'll need to unmute yourself, Alyn. Is a wee. Oh, there you go.
Better?
Yeah.
All right, I will get the hang of this. I think English politics is in trouble, and that's bad news for everybody. It's bad news for independent Ireland. It's bad news not least by England has been offered really thin gruel, but it was a step forward. The establishment of a North East England Regional Assembly would have been a degree of devolution, but both were rejected. The only bit of England that's accepted with any degree of enthusiasm constitutional change was London, with the establishment of the mayor and the Assembly. And there's a job to be done there, because what we have in Scotland and Wales, Northern Ireland is, of course, in a very different situation to any of those scenarios. But what we have with the opportunity of devolution is that we can make decisions closer to the people of Scotland and the people of Wales, which is where we have been able to make real nuts and bolts decisions about people's lives, rejecting austerity in a great many measures. And that's why we do not have the pressure on frontline public services that we do see elsewhere within these islands. And that's where a lot of the discontent that fueled the Leave vote came from. I absolutely agree with our Liberal colleague that first past the post is a rubbish way of electing anybody. I say that, and even despite the fact that the last couple of elections it massively favoured my party, but having done us down for the best part of 70 odd years, We have in Scotland proportional representation of one form or another for local government, national government, the European elections, and we have first past the post only for Westminster, and that leads to a very different political climate in terms of coalition is more built into the system, compromise is more part of the picture, and I think that gives us a better way of doing things. But my concern is that the people who are advocating most for Brexit, in exactly the same way as the people behind the Trump campaign in the US were able to present a billionaire white guy as the anti-establishment voice that was against a somehow political class that's effete and useless. I think they're using that very just anger in order to actually make the situation worse rather than better. And I think they're using Brexit as a pretext for some really negative situation that's going to come forward. And that's why we need to stop it. But in terms of going forward, proportional representation would very much be top of my list to introduce across England. And also citizens' assemblies, constitutional reform to try and ventilate that sort of discussion, to take it out of the political process and towards a more, well, look, Brexit has shown that this isn't working. Let's try and find some other models that do.
Thank you, Alyn. Where's David Martin then? We seem to have lost David Martin. Okay, Carmen then. The perils of internet events, you lose people all the time.
Hi. So I've just got 3 things on this area. First and foremost, votes at 16 and 17 is crucial. And it's amazing that Scotland has already got votes 16 and 17 years, and Wales is soon to follow. But we need that across the UK too. And that debate really isn't happening very often in Westminster, and that needs to follow through. The second point is around diversity, and actually about there's a lot of disenfranchised communities across the UK that don't feel politically engaged, and there's often because they don't see themselves in their representatives, and about how the system needs to empower and support people from all different backgrounds to stand for positions in their local council or for Westminster, and there's different layers, and really trying to diversify our representatives, and so people feel like, when they're looking at their representative, feel like, oh, I kind of see myself in, see themselves in that political sphere. And my third point is similar to what Alyn was talking about in relation to bringing decisions closer to the people which they affect. And in Wales, we do have Welsh Assembly, which is great, but we want to have more devolution and make sure we're bringing those decisions closer to home, having citizens' assemblies, and especially over the last few months, the people of Wales are fed up of with the Westminster tired politics, the arguing, the bickering, and nothing's getting done, and those decisions need to be brought back to the people that are affected by them. That's my 3 points. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. And finally, Tom.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Carmen was saying about votes for people from the age of 16. I think it's absolutely scandalous that the people whose futures will be affected most by Brexit were not able to have a say on that. I also agree with what's been said about a fairer voting system. And I think there is a massive problem of political disengagement, which very much reflects the fact that so many people don't feel that they are properly represented at Westminster. We have a very remarkable example of that in Cornwall, where the majority of people in Cornwall voted for parties other than the Conservative Party, but all of our political representatives at Westminster are Conservatives. I think also inequality has been a massive factor underlying that Brexit vote. I think what we saw in many ways was a protest vote by people who feel left behind, who are blaming problems really caused by our own UK government on the European Union. So I think anything we can do to achieve a fairer economy, to achieve greater tax justice, to make sure that corporations and the ultra-wealthy are seen to be paying their fair share, is going to be helpful in tackling that kind of inequality. But one particular factor I'd like to mention also is disinformation, and this is an area I've done quite a lot of work on. There has been a massive amount of disinformation pumped out about the European Union, and I'm afraid a lot of that has been extremely effective in affecting the way that people think about the EU. It's been very deliberately done. Quite a lot of it has originated from Putin's mafia state in Russia, which gave very great support to one end of the Brexit campaign in the UK. And I think we need to take urgent measures to tackle the spread of disinformation. It's a huge threat to our democracy. It's already done great damage. And it's quite hard to see what we do about it. I wrote a report recently for Molly Scott Cato on Facebook, the tech giants, and their role in spreading disinformation. And that made some recommendations. I think the EU actually has done more than any other institution to actually take on the tech giants. GDPR, of course, is one aspect of that, but I think we can do a lot more. And I think we need a much tougher code of practice for social media companies and the tech giants to make sure that disinformation and lies are not so readily available on those platforms, because they are completely distorting the political debate in the UK. And I think they were a big factor underlying the Brexit vote.
Thank you, Tom. And I see we've got David back. Did you hear the question, David?
Yes, I have the question.
Okay.
But apologies if I repeat what other people said. The answers. I don't think there's any easy answer to this. Having just heard the last point, I agree that fake news is a very serious problem, but there's a very delicate balance to be struck between tackling fake news and censorship. And it's really, sort of looked at this over all period of time, it's really quite debatable how you strike that balance. I mean, there are some things that are outright lies, but for example, even the £350 million inside of a bus, which I would regard as a lie, you can make a case for it if you're on that side of the argument. So it's quite difficult to say whether that should have been banned, whether that should have been stopped. I think it should have, but you can see that other people would say that was pure censorship. So there's a balance to be struck, but I agree we need more responsibility from the social platforms. We need the government to look more closely at this, and again, linked to a previous point made, we need to look at the money involved in this. And there are people pursuing covertly, people have always used money to get their opinions across, but they're now doing it covertly, big money in covert campaigns to distort public opinion and political decision making, and that needs to be tackled. And we're not just talking about Russian money, that is a problem, but if you look at the far right and those people who backed, and many of who backed Trump and so on, this needs to be tackled. And then, more widely in terms of social media, I don't know how we tackle the fact that so many people now operate inside an echo chamber. I know from my own kids, you tend, naturally enough, you tend to follow people whose opinions you already agree with, and they tend not to look at news anymore, so they're not getting an external view, and they're getting, as I say, an echo chamber, they're getting distorted facts repeated, and these facts become their truths. And we need to find ways of, again, we can do it compulsory, but we need to try and find subtle ways of breaking into those echo chambers. In terms of the democratic process, I'm sure I've long been in favour of electoral reform, but actually I don't think electoral reform alone would even contribute very much to solving this problem. I think there's also an issue of the way that politicians are now regarded, which makes it more difficult to get good people to go into politics. And we need to try, again, how we do that, I don't know, we need to try and change the discourse. I mean, I'm a Democrat, and by definition, therefore, I want people who have a different opinion of to be involved in the democratic process, because if we all thought the same, there is no democratic debate, there's no range of choices put to people. But somehow today we've reached the point where often if you put an alternative point, you're seeing in the Scottish context you're sometimes called as a traitor, or in the European context you're called a quisling, or in other issues you're a sellout nation or whatever. And that tone in politics really does not help to have a good discourse, and doesn't help towards quality decision making. And I think if you look at the whole way that the House of Commons has dealt with Brexit, some of that has been driven by fear and intimidation because they don't want to have certain labels attached to them. So I'm afraid I'm more outlining the problem than the solutions, because I don't think there are any easy solutions to this issue. But it's a vital issue for the future of democracy.
Thank you, David. We have another question from.
Bearing in mind this election's been framed as a referendum on Europe, and bearing in mind that people who elected in 1976, does it matter? If you're pro-Europe, does it matter who you vote for, so long as it's not Brexit Party, Conservatives, UKIP, and possibly Labour?
So the question there was, given the fact that the way this election has been framed and the fact that some of the candidates won't take their seats if elected, does it matter which party people vote for as long as it's not one of the overtly anti-European parties like the Tories, UKIP or Brexit, or even the Labour Party? We'll take this in the reverse order this time, so we'll start with Tom. You're muted, Tom. Everybody's muted. Can't hear you. What the hell's going on? Mic on. Sorry, Tom. Tom, you're on mute. Nobody can hear you. You need to unmute yourself.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
I think it matters a great deal that we are very different parties competing in this election. The metric that's going to be most important, if you see this election as a proxy referendum, I think it is actually much more than a proxy referendum, but you can certainly look at it that way. If you want to look at it like that, the metric to look at will be the total number of votes cast for clearly Remain parties. And I think those will be many more than the votes cast for the only really significant, clearly Brexit party standing in this election, or even the two Brexit parties, which would be the Brexit Party itself and the Conservative Party, although that's not unitedly pro-Brexit. And I think the Remain votes will probably outnumber the pro-Brexit votes. But we're very, very different parties in other ways. Of course, we, as Greens, agree completely with the Lib Dems that Brexit is a terrible mistake that needs to be reversed by means of the people's vote. But there are quite a few things that we don't agree on. We take a different approach to the economy. For example, I think the Liberals could fairly be classed as a kind of very much a free market. You could even call them a neo-liberal party. The Liberal Party has always been slightly divided between social liberals and free market liberals, but total freedom of the market is still quite an important concern for many liberals. Greens don't really feel like that at all. We believe that markets need to be controlled and directed in a way that steers them towards more positive outcomes. There are some things that we would agree on with the Labour Party, but there are many things that we differ on. And probably in this election, the thing that we differ on most is whether or not we actually want Brexit. Jeremy Corbyn reiterated yesterday that the Labour Party is a Brexit party, that it actually wants Brexit, and that it will not, in fact, demand a people's vote on any Brexit deal. For us, that should be the absolute bottom line. If you want to vote for a Remain party, it has to be a party that is saying those things. The Labour Party is not clearly saying that, so I cannot see how people who want to stay in the European Union and who want a people's vote can vote for the Labour Party. And I have to say that in Cornwall, I've been meeting huge numbers of people who are long-term Labour voters, but are saying that in this election they're going to be voting Green for the first time, because they see the Greens as a party that stands both for social justice and for action on climate change, but is also a very clearly anti-Brexit party. So I think the old party lines are breaking down, and I think we're going to see that in the results of this election.
Thank you. And next we'll have Carmen.
Yeah. I don't know my sound's on.
Yeah.
So thank you for your question. Well, within we really do hope that we do get a people's vote and hope to actually remain in the EU. So that's why Plaid Cymru, we've written out a full manifesto as if we will be in the European Parliament, and that's something which we hope to do, which includes pledges on fighting climate change and lobbying for an EU transformative fund for poorer, smaller nations like Wales, on how we can not just survive but thrive as economies in Europe. So just on that, we really hope that we get to stay in, and we do have a plan on what we would like to do in the Parliament and continue to do. And then if you're looking for a Remain party, I suppose it is also looking at how strategically you want to vote and if you want to really push that message forward. And as I said in my opening words, a lot of Labour voters, Liberal Democrats, Green voters have said to us on the doorstep over the last few weeks that they're going to vote Plaid Cymru for the third time because they know they've seen the recent polling. We already hold an MEP seat in Wales, so we're the only Remain party that currently holds a seat, and they want to get behind us to see if we could even push to 2. But it really does matter in a sense of making sure that we can make sure we get as many Remain seats as possible throughout the UK. So you will have the Remain party vote. You can see the share in its whole, but obviously what's really important is making sure we get as most seats as possible. Thank you.
Thank you for that. David.
Thank you. The Labour Party is, even on disappointing people, the only party that can actually beat Brexit in the Brexit Party in this election. I don't want to wake up after the count on Sunday to discover that the Brexit Party is the biggest party in the European Parliament, because the message that would send in terms of Brexit would be disastrous. So I'm fighting this election on the basis that we are remaining in the European Union, and that's why I'm proud that we're fighting on a manifesto, as I said earlier, with parties across the 28 member states of the European Union, with a positive agenda for tackling climate change, positive agenda for social justice, and positive agenda in terms of consumer rights and many other rights. So we don't see this as being elected there till Halloween. We believe we're being elected to serve for the next 5 years, and we're going to pursue that as the basis of our activity over the next week or so.
Thank you, David. Alyn.
Yeah, this is a tricky question, and the gentleman's point about, well, does it matter who you vote for if we're all not going to take our seats or we're not going to be there for long? It is exactly what the UK government is hoping that you decide, that this is all pointless and we should just let Brexit happen, and what's to fight for, who cares? The people who are in charge of this process, or the people who pretend to be in charge of this process, are not in charge of this process. Mrs May said there wasn't going to be a Westminster election, then there was. Mrs May said we'd be out on the 29th of March, and we're still in. Mrs May said we'd be out on the 12th of April, and we're still in. This has already moved. I believe with sustained pressure we can continue to move it. I actually agree with David's point that the Labour Party is best placed to beat the Brexit Party UK-wide, which is this discussion, but I really do wish the Labour Party would get its act together with a manifesto that was actually not trying to be all things to all people. And indeed, the Labour Party manifesto is to deliver Brexit. Now, I've got huge respect for David Martin. We've worked hand in glove to promote Scotland's interests in Europe, but I'm proud to stand for a party that is united and committed to the European ideal and the European project, and we're standing on a manifesto for the long term. We reserve our right, of course, to bring independence back if we do everything that we can do, but we can't stop Brexit for the whole of the UK, then we will do what's best for Scotland. But I don't believe that electoral pacts are worthwhile in terms of there should be a Remain vote versus a Leave vote. I think that shuts the voters out of power. I think each party stands on their merits, each party stands on their propositions and their manifestos, and then it's up to you guys to choose. But please, I don't think anyone who's in part of this conversation is looking to do this for just a wee while. This is about stopping Brexit and rebuilding Scotland, England, Northern Ireland and Wales's relationship with the EU and our wider continent, because we need to get rid of this chip on our shoulder that we're somehow special or unique. We are a medium-ranking state, however we define ourselves, and as a block of 500 million people, we'll do an awful lot more together than we'll be able to in any other scenario.
Thank you, Alyn. And finally, Helen.
Thanks. Yeah, it is a tricky one. And I would say that, broadly speaking, a vote for Remain is really important. I think this is a vital election, actually, where we can send a very clear message for that Remain will come out and actually we want to stop Brexit. I think in order to do that, though, you have to back the unequivocally Remain parties on this. And I've encountered this issue with Labour MEPs in my other hustings, in that they're very great pro-Europeans, but their hands are tied. Jeremy Corbyn stood up at the launch of the manifesto and said, we're going to deliver Brexit. He is also backing policies that are hand in glove with the kind of stuff that, that Farage likes. So he's on record saying that immigrants, basically lower wages, and that he wants to stop freedom of movement. Now, my problem is, if you really want to send a message, it's not about sending a message to these good, strong Labour MEPs. It's about sending a message to Corbyn and hitting him where it hurts the ballot box, because he's clearly not moved on Brexit, irrespective of 80% of Labour members. And this is why, certainly on the ground, as a Liberal Democrat, I have had Tories and Labour people just walking up to me saying, I'm just done, I need to vote for you. We've had people who are lending us their vote, but also people who are ripping up their cards because of this. And I just think it's very, very important. And this is, again, with all due respect to the good Labour MEPs. And I think this whole idea about beating Farage, you have beat him with the same kinds of policies. You have to make a very clear stand. And that's where I come back to Liberal Democrats, in the sense that we are, always have been, and we are part of the most pro-European group in the ALDE. Guy Verhofstadt actually came over to the UK. I met him last Friday, and he came over and he was endorsing the Liberal Democrats and endorsing Remain. We are staunchly pro-European, and there is no message that can be tainted in the way that a lot of the people who voted tactically in the general election are now being misquoted as basically voting for Brexit. We can't have that happen again. I would just take issue with Tom's remark that we're neoliberal. That isn't the case. I mean, we're talking about penny in the pound in income tax to help social care. We have a number of, I'm actually on the Fairer Care for All Policy Committee, and we are looking at developing national infrastructure around broadband and things to regenerate local communities. We are anything but a neoliberal economic party. What we do understand is there's not one size fits all for something. And we don't have a predetermined view, as perhaps people maybe a little bit more hardened on the left might take a view on. But yeah, I mean, I would say, do please, this election, no one expected this election to happen. This is a huge opportunity to send a message, and it's sending a message. It's not personal to the people who are, the good people who are pro-European in Labour and the Conservatives. It's actually a message to the leaders to say, enough is enough. Stop Brexit.
Thank you. Thank you, Helen. Another question from the floor? Or shall I abuse the chair's privilege? Well, let me go on. We've been talking a lot about Brexit, but this is the last week we have seen the unravelling of the American-EU deal on Iran, with Trump now talking about sending troops to the Middle East and violence in the Middle East. I'd welcome the panel's thoughts on what Europe should do in this new and dangerous world. And we'll go back the order again, so we'll start again with Helen and work down to Scott. Helen.
So Trump, and I mean, this is an immensely complex situation. I mean, I think we should, essentially the EU is the one who's been very much brokering these Iranian deals and making sure that we actually have some sort of level of security here. And I think Europe should continue to do that. I think it should stick to its principles and make sure that we are supporting and trying to, where we can, pushing back on, frankly, Trump, who is just trying to disrupt through, and I completely agree with Tom's points around Putin and the like, who's clearly trying to disrupt the fragile piece that we've got in that space for his own ends, and really just to cause chaos and to actually destabilise the West as well as the Middle East. So I think we should be sticking to our principles on that and working towards and pushing back on Trump and using the power of the EU to do so.
Thank you. Thank you. Alyn.
Sure, well, in the last mandate was a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Parliament and saw firsthand the extent to which Europe is, or the EU is, increasingly speaking with one voice in the world. As we have done for a lot longer on trade policy, and David knows much more about that than I do, but increasingly in more overt political and geopolitical fora, the EU is increasingly speaking with one voice because we're able to cohere around a core set of values. And the Iran deal really was one of the first landmarks within the EU's common foreign and security policy. And that's why it's so important that we defend it. Now, I know the Middle East well. I grew up in Saudi Arabia. In 1979, we headed out to Riyadh and broadly stayed there for the next 10 years. My folks are still very close to the Middle East, and I sit in the European Parliament's Middle East Working Group, so I spend a lot of time back and forth to the region. And it constantly staggers me that because of various accidents of history, the EU's, the member states of the EU's great allies are in Riyadh, and Tehran is viewed with scepticism and disdain. It in many ways should almost be the other way around, in that we have what could be a liberal democracy in Tehran and Iran, but isn't, because it's not actually been brought into the global fold in a way that it could have been and should have been many years ago. So what we're seeing is President Trump, who has got zero inkling for foreign policy, playing games that he doesn't understand. He's got an advisor who I think is even worse. I think he's trying to provoke a crisis. He's given a green light to Saudi and the regime, the Mohammed bin Sultan regime in Saudi, to do some things that are really beyond any decent values that we can see. The guns and tanks and bombs trade is still flowing, as is the oil trade as well. And we're seeing a proxy war in Yemen between Iran and Saudi, which is having ruinous consequences. And the EU is too quick to send money to mop up the consequences of global failure. And I think we need to be a bit more vocal to make sure that we don't see Trump being allowed to go down this road. And to an extent, of course, we can't stop them, but we can certainly be clear about we will not be complicit in what could be a terrible, terrible mistake in a region that needs to be treated far more sensitively than we see coming out of Washington at the moment.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Alyn. David?
Well, firstly, I agree that the Iran deal was a vital achievement for the European Union. Cathy Ashton, as the High Representative, kicked that off. It was finished by Federica Mogherini, two S&D representatives. I'm very proud of the work they did there. It is also a remarkable achievement that on an issue where the US was not exactly warm, even under President Obama, that the whole of the European Union was united. 28 countries out of 20 countries, 28 countries were in favour of the Iran deal. And now that Trump is trying to destroy it, the 20 are still holding together. But then the question is, and your questioner's point is, how do we keep it together in the face of US sanctions? Because the EU has said, and I'll mention them on the trade committee, the EU has said it would compensate EU companies who face sanctions by the US, but it's not clear what that mechanism would be. And also, given the reach of US banks and US extraterritoriality, it's quite difficult to see how we can protect EU companies and indeed Iranian companies dealing with the EU. I think we should absolutely be trying. We definitely need to try and hold this deal together. It's a pity that Iran itself has now said it's going to end certain parts of the agreement, and that will make it more difficult to hold the European Union together. But I think there's also, as Alyn alluded to, not just in relation to the Middle East, a much wider issue here, which is if Iran does a deal with 20 EU countries, with the United States of America, and then the US reneges in that deal, how is that going to encourage other countries to come to the table and negotiate? Why should North Korea, for example, put any value on such an agreement with the Western world? And so I think this is damaging in terms of stability in the Middle East. There are serious threat of possible war in Iran, but it also just destroys international attempts to find peaceful solutions to difficult problems.
Thank you, David. Carmen.
Yeah, I'm afraid it looks to me very much as if Trump is deliberately seeking a war with Iran. It's a kind of classic strategy of authoritarian rulers or would-be authoritarian rulers to seek war as a means of cementing their domestic support. It's an extremely alarming situation, and it puts a very big question mark, as David was saying, over the rule of law, really, internationally. The fact that Trump has just torn up this treaty with Iran. I think it's quite clear from the UK's perspective that our so-called special relationship with America is really much more of a liability now than anything that should give us a sense of reassurance or protection. And I think in this alarming new world, the world of Trump and America first, it's even more important that Europe stands together as a bloc of countries, of independent sovereign states that stand together behind the rule of law, behind democracy, behind human rights, and take a strong stand on that. I think we do, as David was saying, need to do everything we can to try and make sure that Iran doesn't rush headlong into developing nuclear weapons, and there may be things that Europe can do in that respect. But it's an extremely alarming situation, and I think that Europe really needs to emphasise its role as a peacemaker in this situation. The European Union, of course, started as a peace project. It's been probably the most successful peace project in human history, and I think we need to do everything we can now to keep peace in the wider world.
Thank you very much. And Carmen.
Well, the EU was created as a peace project, and it still maintains peace between the countries of Europe. But Europe now needs to be much more active in finding peaceful solutions to armed conflicts and beyond our neighbourhoods too. But freedom from violence itself is actually a basic right within Europe. And as a party, Plaid Cymru, we have always pushed for more action on working towards international disarmament, but also work that Plaid Cymru have currently been doing with the EFA and Green Group is looking at the setting up of peace institutes And so we would like to set up or progress with the Wales Peace Institute and how different European countries can set up similar institutes with the aim of having their decision makers come to more active solutions and peaceful solutions to conflicts.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to take one last question for the night. We have another question from the floor. And
about the Brexit short Bloomberg report. There have been findings that Nigel Farage might be related to the mutual funds, hedge funds, the companies that were responsible for taking the short course with the people after the course and releasing numbers to politicians. And Farage was doing so much better. Why has there been no action taken against?
okay, so this question is just for Tom of the Green Party. It's well, okay, we'll start with Tom, but it's about the Bloomberg report that Nigel Farage was actively colluding with short sellers to make money from the Brexit vote.
Yes, I know the report you're referring to, and I think it's extremely well researched, very well evidenced, and I think it's almost certainly true. And I think it's shocking, actually, that that particular allegation has not been followed up by a police investigation, because it certainly deserves to be. There are various other ongoing investigations around Farage and more particularly around Aaron Banks, Farage's partner in Leave.eu. But yes, there was certainly short selling going on, and I think that's not the only aspect from which various promoters and backers of Brexit have sought to benefit personally from Brexit and the Brexit referendum result. Market volatility, of course, is a situation in which some kinds of speculator or investor tend to make very large sums of money. And Brexit has been nothing, if not instigator of fantastic market volatility, and there will be much more of it. And we know that some of the backers of the current Brexit Party are planning to profit from this. Disaster capitalism, I think, is a useful phrase here. There is no disaster bad enough that certain people can't make quite a lot of money from it, and Brexit is exactly one of those disasters.
Thanks, Tom. Carmen.
Thank you. Thank you for raising your point there. I'm not familiar with the report myself, but with the economics and around what funds the Brexit Party and also around the illegal funding in relation to the first EU referendum is just quite just despicable, really, on our democracy. And that is why one of the reasons why we should have a people's vote, to bring more honesty into our politics and make sure that, we're not making the rich richer and the poor poorer, and totally stand against that type of politics. And that's why it's so important that people do vote in this election, because it does make a difference. But it's about making sure that those disenfranchised communities feel part of it. But then it's frustrating that all of these behind-the-scenes actions are happening. So I just really just want more people to be politically engaged. This stuff happening behind closed doors, especially with Farage, the media should be taking more action to inform us. Thanks.
Thank you. David.
I very much agree with what Tom has said, and we should bear in mind here that it's not just Farage, but if I recall this report, it also named, I can't remember which one, so I won't name them, don't be libelous, but name some polling companies that were in cahoots with these traders as well, and that also makes you question the accuracy of polling and the motivation behind some of the polling we get. But Farage behaved disgracefully, and there's a clear implication that when he made his concession at 11:30 on the night of the referendum, that he had lost. It was designed to have the impact on the pound that it had. It was designed to push the pound up so he could then short sell the pound. And that is corrupt as far as I'm concerned. And I think Tom's right, there should have been a police investigation into this market manipulation. There's a crime in this country still. And let's also recall that perhaps more legal, but certainly less moral, or equally not moral, is the way that people like Rees Mogg and so on move money to Ireland to take advantage of the shift in the currency as a result of the whole Brexit process. So the great Brexiteers are doing their best to make as much money for themselves out of this. And related to that, of course, if somebody's making money, somebody's also losing money. There's often people who could afford to lose that money. So when the pound shifted, people who had hedged in terms of small traders, trading abroad and so on, or maybe more importantly, those who had failed to hedge, would lose money as a result of contracts get set in one currency and then the rate of the currency changed. So this damaged a lot of people, and more equally importantly, damages our politics quite immensely.
Thank you. Alyn.
Sure, I'd agree with. I think you'll find a lot of agreement across all of us on this one. I mean, it continues to stagger me that there hasn't been a full police inquiry into market manipulation around the Brexit vote and around the immediate hours after polls closed on the night of the count of the EU referendum. I thought from the very first few results coming in, when we saw that Remain was just winning and Leave was winning big, it was the Sunderland result that tipped me over the edge, where I left the count in Edinburgh to go and watch this quietly. It looked like it was going in the wrong direction, and then Farage's concession speech was just weird, because that wasn't the run of events that we'd been seeing and the run of results that we'd had. So I think there is a case to answer there, but there's a wider issue as well, and this is one of my concerns about the prospect of a second EU referendum, which I entirely support, because I think it might be the only way out of it. But we are still operating within the UK, and of course every country does this differently, but within the UK, we are operating to an electoral law that's still actually designed for leaflets and flyers and then handed to you physically or put through your door, or letters being sent to you, or radio adverts or whatever else being put forward with a clear, accountable message. Public broadcasts being put onto the BBC, STV, whatever, where actually technology has moved on way beyond that, and our electoral law has not kept pace with it. So we see there is clear evidence that the Leave, not the plural, because there were several of them, and they did break the rules on colluding with each other as an unorganised campaign. They did break the rules on data protection. They did break the rules on transparency and accountability of who was saying what. There's a promise for every prejudice. It was, if you want your borders back, vote Leave. If you want control of this, vote Leave. If you want £350 million a week for the NHS, vote Leave. And they all had plausible deniability of each other's promises. And what we now know in retrospect was that wasn't them being chaotic, it was a deliberate tactic. And I dare say a number of the individuals involved didn't realise just how coordinated it all was, but we've seen all sorts of sock puppet organisations, this Be Leave with the poor creator Darren Grimes, who seems to have been hung out to dry since, as a fall guy for all of this sort of stuff. And this will come out in the wash, but my concern is that all of our elections from now and into the future are still vulnerable to this stuff, because there's a wider question that needs to be looked at. Now, I don't know, is it a royal commission on a UK level? Could the Scottish Government take more stuff on this, bearing in mind the extent to which electoral law is reserved as a Westminster matter? But I think those of us who are concerned about democracy in our islands really need to put a kind of differences and get behind a call for, we need to reboot how we do all of this stuff. Because it's not just one election and it's not just one referendum, it's the we have a systemic problem with it.
Thank you, Alyn. And Helen.
Hi, yes. I mean, obviously, I agree with what people are saying. However, I've got a couple of points on this. I personally, speaking from a digital angle, so I work in robotics, AI, all that sort of stuff, we need to get so much hotter on how people are using this new technology. And government has to get on the front foot around that and really understanding how, because it's these algorithms that create these echo chambers. And I think politicians have to be a lot hotter on it as well. They need to really, swat up on this. It's not good enough anymore to know a bit about it. You actually have to understand it to tackle it. I think there's another bit, which I would also say, I mean, whilst I do agree with the legal process, I actually think the really big issue is no one cares. You look at Trump, and they don't care that he's a big con man. I was in Hustings on Monday, and I swear, the guy for the Brexit Party, number one on the list, has literally done a podcast saying he's quids in with a hard Brexit because he's got 85% of his stock holdings in Poland. And said, I'm going to make the money out of that, I'll get the exchange rate, and then I'll buy up all the cheap commercial property in London. And they didn't care. The Brexit people didn't care. And there is something about, and I think the legal process will do some of it, but it's so dry, and it needs to be done. But there is something about we as politicians, we have to start getting people caring about this. Because there is something about, I think it was mentioned earlier in the call, I can't remember who said it, but I think it's happened since the expenses scandal. I've only been involved in politics since the referendum. I'm like 3 years. I was sitting on my couch in shock, and now I'm standing as an MEP 3 years later, having never been a member of I've never really been a member of a political party before. And this is about how do we get people to actually care about this. And I think this is about us as politicians having to people and explain why these people are screwing them over in a way that makes them feel like they're not being insulted. Because something must have been around these guys and call them out and asking the questions. And maybe journalism as well has been failing on this point, but I can't control journalists, nor should Britain. So I think there is something for us as well, and I think we can't just rely on the legal process because they won't care. People just won't care. That's a bit negative, but I think it's something we can do as politicians is what I'm saying.
Thank you very much. I think we'll draw the evenings close now, let all the candidates get away. I know they're now moving into the last week, it's very, very busy, so I'd like to invite to give them a round of applause for their time. I wish you all the best of luck in the election, and I hope maybe we will even be able to have another European Union hustings in another 5 years' time. It does appear that the process has gone slow, but I'd like to thank you all very much for giving us your time. It's been a real privilege to hear from so many people who've given up their time and effort to fight this election. So once again, thank you very much. Thanks for coming.